The hand shot up in the back row before the priest even finished asking if anyone objected. 300 guests turned at once. A man in a torn brown coat stood between the polished pews, his boots leaving wet prints on the marble, his beard gray and matted. His eyes locked on the groom like he'd been waiting years for this exact second. "Don't marry her," he said. "Not until you know the truth." The groom, Daniel Marsh, froze mid-breath, one hand still holding his vows. His bride, Claire, gripped her bouquet so tight the stems cracked. Somewhere behind him, his mother gasped. Security near the door started moving. But Daniel didn't sit down. He didn't call for the man to be thrown out. He stared at the stranger like he recognized something buried deep, something he couldn't yet name. "Who are you?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The old man lowered his hand slowly. "Someone who owes you an apology 23 years overdue." The church went silent. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Rewind 8 hours. That same homeless man, later identified as Walter Boone, had been sitting outside a gas station 2 miles from the church, counting coins for a cup of coffee. Nobody looked at him twice. That was normal. Nobody had looked at him twice in over a decade. But Walter had seen the wedding announcement in an old newspaper someone left on a bench. Daniel Marsh. That name hit him like a fist to the chest. He hadn't seen that name in over 2 decades. Not since the night everything in his life fell apart. If you believe small moments can carry weight nobody expects, moments that wait years before they matter, hit like, subscribe, and stay with this story because Walter didn't come to that church by accident. He came because of something buried in his past that was about to reshape everything. 23 years earlier, Walter Boone had been a mechanic in a small town outside the city. He wasn't rich. He wasn't important. But he was honest, and one snowy night, honesty had cost him everything. A car had swerved off an icy road. Inside was a woman, 7 months pregnant, trapped and bleeding, her husband unconscious in the driver's seat. Walter had been the only one on that stretch of highway. He pulled both of them out with his bare hands before the car caught fire. He carried the woman nearly half a mile through the snow to reach a farmhouse with a phone. That woman survived. So did her baby. That baby was Daniel. But Walter never told anyone what he'd done. He didn't want thanks. He just went back to his shop the next morning like nothing happened. Then everything fell apart. A fire at his repair shop, caused by a faulty part he didn't install but was blamed for anyway, wiped out his business and his reputation in the same week. The man who owned the property, a wealthy investor named Richard Colton, made sure Walter never worked in that town again. Colton needed a scapegoat to protect his own negligence, and Walter, poor and unconnected, was the easiest one to sacrifice. Walter lost his home, then his marriage, then slowly himself. He never blamed the world. He just disappeared into it. For 23 years, he lived on the edges, sleeping in shelters, then doorways, then wherever the night allowed. He never spoke about the family he saved. He assumed they never knew his name. He was wrong. Back in the church, Claire's father stood, his face pale. "Richard," Daniel said slowly, turning toward the man seated beside his mother. "You knew about this?" Richard Colton, the very man now serving as Daniel's father-in-law, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His silence answered the question louder than words could. Because Richard Colton wasn't just the man who destroyed Walter's shop years ago. He was also the driver of that icy car. The man Walter had pulled from the wreckage. The man whose wife and unborn son Walter had saved with nothing but his bare hands and a desperate refusal to let 2 strangers die in the snow. And instead of gratitude, Richard had buried the truth to protect his image, terrified that admitting a homeless mechanic saved his family would somehow diminish the empire he built afterward. This is the moment everything you've felt so far was leading toward. Stay with it because the biggest revelation hasn't happened yet. Daniel turned back to Walter, his eyes glistening. "You saved my mother's life? Mine too?" Walter nodded, his voice cracking. "I never wanted anything for it. I just couldn't watch her die out there. And when I saw your name in that paper this morning, I knew I couldn't let you marry into a family built on a lie without at least telling you the truth." Claire stepped down from the altar, her wedding dress trailing over marble, and walked straight to Walter. She took his weathered hand in both of hers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving him the chance to be born." Daniel's mother rose next, tears streaming freely, recognizing the face she'd spent 23 years trying to remember through fog and fear. She embraced Walter like she was finally completing something she'd carried unfinished her entire life. Richard Colton tried to explain himself, stammering about protecting the family's reputation, but no one was listening anymore. The truth had already done what truth always does. It simply stood there, undeniable, and let the silence around it speak. The wedding didn't happen that afternoon the way anyone expected. Instead, it happened an hour later, smaller, quieter, more meaningful, with one extra guest standing beside the groom's mother. Walter Boone, in a borrowed jacket someone had rushed to find him, watched Daniel marry the woman he loved, knowing his one act of kindness decades ago had rippled forward into this exact, unrepeatable moment. Daniel later helped Walter find a home, a steady job, and slowly, a life rebuilt from the ground up, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude too large for words. Because sometimes the smallest, most forgotten people are the ones quietly holding the biggest miracles. If this story moved you, subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life stories about kindness, justice, and the moments that change everything.